You made the point, oh, it's an actual illuminating hearing. Why is that? Because after 5 years of every hearing being these ridiculous food fights where Republicans take their turn and for 5 minutes talk about, I don't know, Benghazi, you actually had a focused hearing on presentation and uncovering of facts. And basically, that's because McCarthy made the decision, not to participate. So in retrospect, was it a blunder for McCarthy, you think, to refuse to participate? And they've been really quiet haven't tried to counter this sort of avalanche of info. How are they attempting, or will they attempt to counter or refute what's happening in the hearings?
I mean, it would be nice if only the substance matters for history, but politics matters for history. And I'm very much with Ezra, and he said better than I have when I've sputtered about this for the last 5 years. I mean, how dire the situation really is, which I very much believe. The one thing I do think, and I'm not sure about this, but I think this is true. I'd say these kinds of populist authoritarian movements tend not to be quite as easy to hand off from the original demagogue to the successor. We could sit here and say DeSantis is clearly smarter than, more disciplined than Trump and more focused and, maybe would be more effective. And I take that point, and maybe Hawley and Tucker Carlson and Peter Thiel even more dangerous, which I also happen to believe ultimately. On the other hand, Trump, the original demagogue, has a big advantage. And, you get splintering when the original guy goes, and there'll be fights and disappointments, and Marjorie Taylor Greene won't like it that DeSantis is doing this. So I feel like, as someone from the point of view of liberal democracy, I kind of think weakening Trump is very important, even though I can spit out, as we all could, 8 different scenarios where we're still in terrible shape with Donald Trump not on the scene 3 or 4 years from now. So,
what are the signals that we would see if Trump was really weakened in the Republican Party? I mean, don't we need to see elite officials moving away from him?
I think you'd have to see DeSantis deciding to run, whether or not Trump runs. And even if Trump announces, which I don't think is out of the question, incidentally, this summer or on Labor Day, precisely to recruit, to try to, in a way, freeze DeSantis, would have to see big donors, really big donors, and some state and local electeds and other, quote, influentials who had been okay with Trump explicitly endorsing, let's say DeSantis, just use him for now, against Trump, not just keeping quiet, And I think if those two things happen by the end of the year, DeSantis clearly running, real people coming, not just quietly murmuring, ooh, I don't know about Trump, but I can't say anything, which is their current mode. Now, having said all this, right now, the person I talked to most recently who's in touch with some of these donors, I said, would any of them say this now? Would any of them say next week or 3 weeks from now when the hearings end, look, I respect Trump, I'm grateful, blah, 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 but I'm with someone else for 2024. And the person I was talking to said, no. But maybe that's a November, December thing. But I think those might be indications, I believe.
It's interesting you don't even mention Pence in this equation. So do we think he's basically a non-player on the presidential stage in 24?
I think he's a little too quickly eliminated in the sense that it feels like a little like Biden in 20. One can imagine a scenario where can't quite be Trump. DeSantis, for some reason or other, just doesn't make it. So Scott Walker, the governor who looks so strong 2 years out and isn't so strong once people get to see him more. And a certain kind of weird default back to, could we have Trump without January 6th? Well, who, leaving aside his own, believe me, problems and characteristics, who is Trump without January 6th? Sort of literally. It's Mike Pence. He went along with literally every single thing except January 6th. Now, having said all that, there are all kinds of reasons why Pence is problematic. He's in a bizarre middle ground between the Trump loyalists, who now some of whom hate him, and everyone who would like a fresh start, which isn't Pence. So I think ultimately you probably end up then with some senator or some governor, not Pence. But I can sort of see a sort of Biden-esque default to Pence in that respect.
Gaming out 2024 is a fun hobby, but assume that everything I'm about to say will become unbelievably wrong. I think people really underestimate at this point a split in the Trumpist wing that creates opportunities in other wings of the party to come through. Because the thing that Trump was able to do in 2016 was run functionally alone in his more or less populist right wing. And now everybody in the party wants to be Donald Trump to a first approximation. So you can imagine a world where Donald Trump runs and also Ron DeSantis runs and also Josh Hawley is trying to be like both of them and a couple other players are doing it. And that actually creates openings for someone else. You can imagine a world where Donald Trump doesn't run, but there are 8 people trying to to do their best Donald Trump impression, and that creates an opportunity. I think just as part of what made Trump work in 2016 was a large field that split a bunch of the vote that wasn't naturally going to go to him. If Trump runs, presumably he gets a Trump vote, although if DeSantis runs, I think there's actually some chance more of it could split than people currently realize. But nevertheless, if he doesn't, that's a lot of people going after the same voters. And those voters are not the entirety of the Republican Party. A lot of people wanted other things. And so, I don't know. I think the Republican primary is much more open. And I will say, I just think there's one thing that we're not talking about here that is kind of important, which is, what did Joe Biden and the Democrats do with any of this? Does Joe Biden and does the Democratic Party, not just Congress as an institutional figure or institutional player, do Biden and the Democrats believe this is something to run on? Do they want to increase the salience of this question in politics, or do they want to reduce it?
They're obviously not sure, right?
They're obviously not sure. And I also think that really matters. Look, if you go through the hearings and it unearths all this material, and the other party decides not to do anything with it, and the Republican Party obviously is not going to autonomously do anything with it, it's very hard to see what happens here. Now, of course, like the problem for Democrats is if you make it Democratic, you polarize the issue too. So there's not an obviously good play here, but I do think which play is chosen is really going to have a big impact on whether or not these hearings have changed anything a year from today.